Thus, it's obvious that the political 2 degrees Celsius target, as it is named, cannot be reached in a top-down process any longer. Political challenges, regulatory instruments, and this is my focus, civil society engagement. Do we have the right answers and key projects towards a sustainability 100% future? This is utopian, isn't it? Okay, let's start. The answer is yes and no. And I briefly want to give some reasons for that. The political challenges are clear, and in principle there are consensus almost worldwide. Yes, we want to respect the 2 degrees Celsius guardrail in global warming, and also for other reasons limit greenhouse gas emissions to such an extent that we leave a habitable and better world to our kids. G8 and G20 have affirmed this goal in principle, and the Copenhagen Climate Summit likewise has used this formula as a basis for an informal state commitment in so-called pledge and review procedures. But no, a post-2012 treaty under international law as a follow-up to the Kyoto Protocol has not been achieved, and there are no indications that we will accomplish such a treaty in Cancun or next year in South Africa. Thus, it's obvious that the political 2 degrees Celsius target, as it is named, cannot be reached in a top-down process any longer. It's due to the self-interest of the superpowers, the US and China, the fear of a loss of national sovereignty of many powers, particularly the emerging countries, an anti-colonial rhetoric, and a lack of leadership of the European Union, that the moral consensus cannot be implemented politically. Is it possible bottom-up? The risks are at hand. A decentralized climate strategy based on voluntariness, without monitoring and accountability mechanisms for a global emissions trading system, will probably lead us into a world of 3 or 4 degrees more. We are already on the way to it. This, however, is not a reason not to pursue climate action bottom up. By this, we can understand various things. A subnational climate initiative, and for example the alliances of cities supplementing centralized and supranational endeavors to steer the climate process. Or corporate activities, creating a market for climate-friendly products and services. Or voluntary and individual reduction commitments by civil society which anticipate or exceed legal and administrative rules. Think about if Copenhagen would have succeeded, then of course the endeavor for civil society would have been enormous, because it's no longer to the politicians to act. It then would have been the duty of civil society to do what it can do anyway. Or a climate policy which reflects the multipolarity of world politics and creates space for spontaneous or coordinated government initiatives, such as the program to protect the Amazon in Brazil, which could be supported, which is supported and can be more supported by Germany and Norway, or the UK's low-carbon partnership with China. So these are examples for bottom-up initiatives, very diverse levels and initiatives. Furthermore, we can add para-state approaches, such as, for example, I don't know if you like him, the Soros Climate Policy Initiative, or the initiative launched by the Munich Re Foundation to extend insurance protection to small farmers in developing countries at risk from climate change. This multi-level approach, which continues to have an internationally binding climate treaty as ultimate goal, should be supplemented with a worldwide debate like ours today. This should focus in particular on ways of closing the wide gap between the commitments proposed and those required to achieve compliance with the 2 degrees Celsius guardrail, and on ensuring that the climate issue is given due relevance in the formulation of global policy objectives. Secondly, the key projects. Again, yes and no. Yes, to bring about a change in climate and energy policy, we do have the technologies in the fields of renewable energies. You were discussing this this morning. An energy-efficient infrastructure for mobility, nutrition, and urban development. The design is there. Over a period of 30 or 40 years, we even have the financial resources that will not require much more than 3 or 4 or even 5% of the world's gross national product. It's peanuts, as a banker in Germany once said. But no, we do not have an up-to-date policy, and we have not yet achieved the required mobilization of civil society. The past dependencies and lobbies of business as usual are too strong to even achieve a green business as usual, let alone a great transformation that combines sustainability and global justice. In this respect, let me just make a few comments on the recent German government's energy concept. From a European point of view, energy consumption can significantly be reduced by 2050 through savings and increases in efficiency. The 2 degrees Celsius guardrail can be kept with a drastic reduction of greenhouse gases as well. The global energy scenarios, however, speak a different language. The hunger for energy that still persists in the United Nations is growing exponentially in some of the important emerging countries. This, of course, is no argument against a concept which massively promotes renewable energies. On the contrary, Europe should demonstrate to its co-players opportunities to bring about a fast transition through regional energy and research cooperation. The emerging economies can win a lot by a big leap forward. It's not a Maoist concept. This was in the 50s. I'm talking about the 21st century. And through emissions trading and development cooperation, the poorest countries can practice leapfrogging. That means leap the fossil stage of development. The paragon here is presently Brazil. The country on its way to become a regional leading player in South America can rise to an advanced climate protector by fully exploiting the potentials of bioenergy with ethanol and biodiesel. But it can also let Petrobras, the petrol company, revert to fossil sources that are plentiful embedded in its soil and off the coast, and besides even choose the nuclear option. Brazil has 3 options at hand. Deepwater Horizon may have disillusioned this oil dorado, Brazilian oil dorado, and probably turned attention to the extensive natural gas resources as a bridge technology. In Brazil, solar and wind energy only play a minor role, and above all, it would have to be good sense in terms of climate policy that could bring Brazil to an energy cooperation in the field of renewable energies and to the point of abandoning its oil reserves. You have to convince the Brazilian government to refrain from exploiting such valuable resources offshore. The same applies to the coal reserves in Chinese soil, which have fueled the economic boom since the 1980s and even more since the turn of the millennium, with the effect that China by now is the biggest per capita polluter. But the country is also now pursuing a dual strategy. That is, it makes it a quickly increasing number of new coal-fired power stations more climate-friendly through CCS technologies, and at the same time adopts an efficiency strategy that makes renewable energies profitable as well. It already exports wind turbines and solar cells all over the world. 30% of the market is now in Chinese hands. The explicit low-carbon discourse facilitates approaches for partnerships with Europe and with the US. Almost the same applies to the other former socialist world power that possesses enormous oil and gas reserves, Russia, but at the same time has to turn its energy and consumption sector much more efficient. Last not least, India and Indonesia as newly industrializing countries with a currently still relatively low per capita level of emissions, but with a fast-growing energy demand that mostly has to be covered by imports. India could profit enormously from global emissions trading, while Indonesia has furthermore ambitious plans to convert the presently oil-based energy mix to gas and renewable energies by 2050. Not least, a European energy concept has to include a plan on how to reduce energy poverty in the above-mentioned emerging economies, and above all in sub-Saharan Africa.